I call to order this regular meeting of the Mount Pleasant City Commission, Monday, October 28th, 2019. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, has the roll been taken?
It has. All are present tonight.
Tonight we have one presentation, a departmental presentation by Utility Billing, and I'll invite Sue Jones to come up and start.
You broke it, Sue. Come back after the first of the year.
Touching it, I thought it was a touch screen. Good evening. As Mayor said, my name is Sue Jones, and I am part of the utility billing and cashiering team. We are a team of 4, myself and 3 frontline staff. The top priority in our department is customer service. We are the only contact that the vast majority of the city residents have with the city through paying their utility bills and or their taxes. And we're really probably the first contact that the majority of the residents moving into our city have with the city by coming in and maybe signing up for a utility bill or whatnot. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they feel welcomed and that we explain all the services that we have within the city, whether it be their water and sewer bill, their curb recycling, trash pickup, large item pickup, brush chipping, and the list goes on. And we also have a lot of new residents coming into our city that are students who've never even paid a water bill or don't know how to sign up for trash pickup. So it's part of our responsibility to educate them on that process. I would say the interaction that we have with the customers is probably the best part about being in our department. So it's really wonderful to be able to serve the residents in that way. We also do a lot of scheduling for the water department. We schedule around 1,500 to 1,800 work orders every year. Anything from final reads to meter rotations to rewiring touchpads, turn-ons and turn-offs. So with the water and sewer bills, we collect roughly $5.3 million worth of revenue annually. We process over 6,100 plus water sewer bills every single month. Our customers are given the option of paying their bills receiving their bills either by mail or email. 90% of our customers elect to have their bills sent to them by mail, and we have about 10% that choose email. The options that they have for paying is they can pay in person, they can pay in the Dropbox, they can send us a check through the mail, they can sign up for auto pay, or they can pay electronically. 60% of our customers choose to send us a check or put it in the Dropbox, or actually to come in and see us on occasion, which is really nice. We have 20% of our customers elect to use auto pay, and this is a service where the customer signs up to have the city automatically deduct the bill from their bank account each month on the due date. And then the remaining 20% choose electronic, and this is where they will go into their bank and have set it up so their bank will send us a payment, or they use a third-party processor to make their payment arrangement. BS&A Online is a great tool that we have for our utility billing customers. It gives them the ability to go on and see what their current water bill is if they've misplaced their bill, or it gives them the ability to go and look and see what last month's bill was or what their usage has been for the last month. So that's a great tool that we offer our customers. Not only do we send out utility bills, but we also are in charge of sending out all the tax bills, both real and personal property. 25 million of taxes is collected annually for the city and other taxing jurisdictions. We process roughly 5,500 tax bills, plus we do an additional 1,700 copies for our mortgage companies or our banking. We do that semi-annually. Our Our summer tax bills are received by our customers roughly around the 1st of July, and our winter bills are sent out and received by our customers like the 1st of December. Approximately 77% of non-principal residence mills and 89% of principal resident mills are billed on the summer tax bill, and the remaining 23% and 11% mills are billed on the winter. So as you can see, our summer tax bills are quite a little bit higher than our winter tax bills. Our customers all receive their tax bills by mail. Our mortgage companies and our banks, they have the option to either receive it by mail or electronically. 90% choose to have them sent to them electronically, and the other 10% choose to have them mailed. The options for paying our tax bills are either in person, drop box, a check through the mail, or electronically. 68% of our customers actually choose to either come in, put it in the drop box, or send it into mail. And we really see a real increase in the number of our customers during tax season that come in. A lot of them like to bring that check in and hand it, get a stamped receipt right then and there. So that we enjoy that part of it. 32% choose to pay electronically. Out of that 32%, 27% of those are mortgage companies and banks, with the remaining 5%, which is quite a low number, are our individual taxpayers. So we don't really have that many taxpayers who choose to pay their taxes electronically. Like I said, vast majority of them choose to actually come in and bring us a check. Our summer tax bills are about 90% collected by the due date, which is July 31st. And both our winter and summer are roughly at the 97% collected by March 1st. And March 1st is the date that we actually turn over any uncollected taxes to the county for collection. Just like with the utility billing, BSNAonline.com is another service that we offer to our tax customers. So if they misplaced their tax bill, they can check that out, or if they want to see what last year's was. Or if they're buying a house, anybody buying a house in the city, they can go on to BSNAonline.com and they can check out what the history has been on a location in the city. We also sell or receive payment for other city services that are offered by other departments, such as the bag tags, replacement recycling bins, large item stickers, brush chipping, permits, housing license, building permits, the list goes on. We receive an average of roughly 52,000 transactions every year through our department. So if you were to average that out, that averages out about to 200 transactions per day. Pretty much concludes my little presentation, so if anybody has any questions. Tony, yes.
You collect the burial fees and lot sales for the cemetery also, right?
That's correct, yep, we sure do, yeah. Yes.
As one of the people that gets my utility bill by email and pays it online, I've always had a question about, you can pay for this month or you can hit repeat, automatic. And I've never understood that. I never do it because it's different every month. And so I just wondered what, I must be misinterpreting what the other.
If you're paying yours online and you're doing it yourself, which I think is how you handle yours, if you hit repeat, it's going to keep paying the same amount every month. So at some point you're either going to be way ahead or
Okay, that's right.
possibly
That's
behind.
right.
Because the third-party processor you're going through is not linked to our system.
Right.
So if a customer chooses to have it done automatically every month, they would want to sign up for auto pay. And as I said before, that's where they sign up with us, and then, we collect the payment from the bank account each and every month.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else? No? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight? Joe?
I'd like to add an item to discuss section 50-40 of the city code. It has to do with sewer lines.
Is there a second? Commissioner Lulone?
Second.
Discussion? Vice Mayor Gills?
Being that I have no idea what you're bringing up, Tony, can you give me a synopsis of what this is about, just a quick version?
The ordinance now requires that if you have two properties, if you have two buildings on one property, and you have to replace a sewer line, you have to replace two sewer lines. The property behind me has two properties, got the front house and what was a garage apartment. Their sewer line failed, and they're in the process of digging it up. And in order to meet the requirements of the ordinance, they'll have to dig up a brand new alley that was just paved this year on a special assessment basis. And it'll never drain right after that, so I'm looking for some support to allow the manager to waive that requirement. We can have some discussion on that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor of adding, I guess this would be item 17, is that what we'd like to call it?
I think we would do it before you went into your announcement, so it would be right after 14 is I think when we would want to do it.
So we'll make this item 15, and then the other items will be 16 and 17.
Just want to make a caveat that most of the time I'm comfortable putting stuff on the agenda just because we haven't been versed in what we
I
are.
didn't know this was happening until tonight.
Okay.
And we need 5 votes in support to put this on the agenda, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. All those in favor of adding item number 15 to discuss section 50.40 of city ordinance? Am I saying that right?
50.40.
Yeah.
Actually, it's section 51.04 if you're talking about sanitary sewer. So if we're going to have the right.
Okay.
Yes.
51.04. Okay. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same.
Nay.
So that motion passes with a 5 to 2. Okay. Any other additions or deletions to the agenda tonight? Seeing none, I will now open the public input on agenda items. If you're here to speak on something on the agenda tonight, please come to the podium, state your name, your address, and you have 5 minutes to address the commission. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public input. And we will go into our receipt of petitions and communications.
Under our receipt of petitions and communications this evening, you have the report and the pending items. And as I indicated 2 weeks ago, we also included a communication that provides some follow-up on some specific information that was brought forward in a couple of the communications over the last couple of weeks regarding the zoning ordinance. And we've outlined in that communication some potential items that this board may want to consider for referral to either the Planning Commission or to yourselves to review some of our existing policies. And we've outlined those at the end of the memo. So you may want to have some time to think about that, but at the next meeting, we will be looking for some direction from you as to whether you want to do any referrals of any of those items to move those through the process for review. And then the other items on the consent calendar on the receipt of petitions and communications is the third quarter investment report and the September minutes of the Airport Advisory Board.
Okay. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the consent calendar items. Are there any items that need to be removed from the consent calendar this evening? Seeing none, Manager Ridley, would you like to go through those?
Yes, we're recommending tonight that you consider approval of the minutes of your regular meeting from October 14th. And then we have 2 bids for you this evening. The first is for our stop-loss health insurance carrier. And as you know, this is an annual process in which our third-party administrator for health insurance collects bids on our behalf for this reinsurance for our large claims that may occur during the year. And as the memo indicates, we received 2 bids this year, and we're recommending approval of the low bid, which also happens to be our current carrier. The price increase, unfortunately, is 22% over what we're paying in the current year, which is primarily attributable to what's going on in the stop-loss insurance market these days. Most of the costs are going up at that rate, primarily due to items such as more specialty drugs being available, some erosions of network discounts when you get to the higher cost claims, more catastrophic claims, not in our book of business necessarily, but across the insurance industry, and the elimination of lifetime maximums from health insurance plans. We do have adequate funds in the health insurance fund to cover this cost increase, so we're recommending you authorize the mayor to sign the contract with Tokyo Marine HCC as the rates indicated in the memo. And our second bid this evening is we're actually recommending a sole source bid with AKT Peerless. And this is related to the pipes that we found earlier this year near the area that used to be the city landfill near the Chippewa River. As you know, with the help of AKT throughout the summer, we worked in cooperation with the state, I can never remember what it stands for, EAGLE is their acronym, the state, what used to be the DEQ, and the EPA, and we conducted the appropriate testing for those pipes, and we actually capped the pipes to eliminate any future discharges. But during that time, both EAGLE and EPA suggested that we do additional testing in that landfill site so that we can do appropriate monitoring based on current regulations. So even though the site was closed in 1975, they're recommending that we do some additional testing to make sure we know what's happening under the ground near that landfill site and see if any potential additional remediation is needed. So we're recommending we contract with AKT Peerless for that testing. The contract is approximately $30,000, or is not to exceed $30,000, but half of that is lab testing. And we would have paid that lab testing to any environmental consulting firm that would have done this work for us. But we're recommending we stick with AKT because they're familiar with the site. They've been involved with all of the discussions with EAGLE and EPA up to this point. And obviously we've worked with them on other projects too, and they always do high quality work. So we're recommending the authorization of a sole source bid of not to exceed $30,000 and the appropriate budget amendment for that so we can get that monitoring work done this year. The next item on the consent calendar is final approval of a traffic control order, and this is for the 4-way stop signs that are at Washington and Hopkins. And this, those stop signs were moved a little bit, or 90 days ago, so that they lined up at the road intersection instead of right at the pedestrian walkway. And it's been in place for 90 days, and we only received one comment during that time period, and it was actually a staff comment questioning, since there's not a stop sign at the crosswalk any longer, if you're still required to stop there. And certainly you are if there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk, just like any other crosswalk, but otherwise there's no requirement to stop at that crosswalk. So we're recommending that become a final traffic control order. Next, we're recommending you set a public hearing for November 11th on changes to our local ordinance that has to do with fireworks displays. The state of Michigan amended the state fireworks ordinance in December of 2018, primarily changing the dates and times where fireworks are allowed, but also making a few other minor changes to it. So we've worked with the city attorney to review our ordinance and are recommending changes to our ordinance to bring it into compliance with state law. So we're recommending that public hearing for November 11th. And then the next item on the consent calendar is to make an additional one-time payment to our retirement system. As you know, we mentioned this in the amended budget process, and we discussed it briefly in the last work session. And this payment would come from our existing fund balance, And even after making the payment, our fund balance would be at approximately 22%, which exceeds our fund balance goal. And the reason for making this payment is when the actuarial assumptions were made for the retirement program back in 2015, instead of jumping immediately to a higher contribution rate, we chose the option of smoothing out our contribution rate so there wasn't as big of a hit in 1 year, and we've been paying that smoothed amount. But since we have funds available and we've recently learned that the retirement system is going to change the assumptions again in 2021, we think it would be a good idea to do a slight catch-up provision on that smoothed amount to level out those payments in the future years. So we're recommending that we move forward with making that one-time payment of $240,000 from the fund balance. And then lastly is approval of payrolls and warrants.
Commissioner Kulik,
Move the consent calendar as presented.
Vice Mayor Gillis. Discussion? Commissioner Toles.
Question on, excuse me, 6B, on the extra not to exceed $30,000 worth of testing. And where's this testing being done? In the old landfill?
Yes, in areas around where the old landfill was.
And why would we have to do testing in the old landfill?
Both Eagle and the EPA have recommended that we do that to make sure that to verify whether any leakage is coming out of that landfill and is putting the river at risk in any way.
But the way I understand it, there was a flow line. That flow line has been capped now.
The flow line that went directly to the river has been capped.
So why aren't we testing right around where the flow came out into the river in that area? Why would you go back into a dump that's already been sealed and capped and lined and drill holes in it now?
To make sure that the sealing and capping and lining is still being effective.
But that doesn't make sense to me, because if you're drilling in something that's been capped and already approved, that has a clay liner below it and above it, and you're drilling holes through it, you're actually drilling holes that are going to allow seepage. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
John, do you have additional details that would help with that?
What they're doing is they're going to drill through the cap and see what the groundwater below the former landfill, what chemicals it contains. The intent is so that there's not a pathway from that area to the surface water, the river. Certainly, when they drill those holes, they'll cap them when they're done with it. But they need to find out what chemicals lie beneath that landfill, and then with the holes around the perimeter, they'll see if what's there is in fact contained by that capping. But the intent is to stop the pathway from the groundwater to the surface water.
It seems to me if you want to stop the flow and you go near the river, okay, any flow is going to go towards the river. You've already capped that line. So all you'd have to do is put monitor wells and drill wells along. That would tell you if you're leaking anything. I can't see drilling into a cap that's already been approved, re-drilling through the cap and disturbing that now. It doesn't make any sense to me. Just like in the oil field, you have a cap of clay below and a cap of clay above it. So why would you drill through that and create holes through that?
The intent is to find out what chemicals lie in and beneath that landfill in the groundwater beneath it. And then once they know what chemicals there, that's the benchmark to say what in fact is there a pathway that leads from that to the river. We know that there's groundwater under there, and that's okay. But if there's chemicals that are in that groundwater and move to the surface water, that's where there will be an issue, if there is one.
But how would it move to the surface water? Excuse me, if you have clay below it and clay above it, once you drill a hole through it, then you're given that source, it can come out and leak. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You're just opening up a big can of worms right now.
I'm not sure, and we'll know I guess when they drill through this and see what there is, I'm not sure there was necessarily the cap when we started our landfill. The rules then weren't the same as they are now on the bottom of the underneath side of it.
But actually, you're grandfathered in under the old cap laws that you cap it in. Now that you're drilling into there, if you have any contaminated fluid, it's a clay line above it and below it. So what are you proving, that there's contaminated fluid there? All you're trying to see if it's seeping into the river right now. And I'm saying for this $30,000 cap, you're gonna be way over that by the time you get started with this.
That was the purpose of making it not to exceed, because you can control that by saying, don't go more than that. In terms of the initial finding what chemicals are in it, and then the wells that determine what flow of the groundwater moves towards the surface water. We eliminated the pipes, which took care of the obvious ones, and this is DEQ, the Eagle, would like us to confirm that there's no passageway between the groundwater under the landfill and the surface water of the river.
It just doesn't make sense to me, because in the oil field, you're basically talking about the same thing. If you have something that's capped and sealed, it can't go anywhere. I can see if you had contamination coming out of that tube going into the river, and they tested that water and you got contamination out. Now you seal it. You're gonna go to that point along the river and you're gonna drill monitor wells to see if anything is seeping out. Now you're telling me you're gonna go in this old landfill and just start drilling around and see if there's contamination there. Of course you're gonna have contamination in there. That's why it has a clay liner above it and below it to seal it and contain it. And what I'm telling you, once you start with the DEQ, there is no end. You'll be testing there forever. And you're opening up a precedence, I think, which I don't think is necessary.
Recently, they have, and maybe when we had the landfill back in the 60s and 70s, there wasn't a requirement, but now there are requirements for that assurance of the passageway between the what could potentially be contaminated groundwater up to the surface water. If there's no pathways, and this test verifies that, we're good. If there is a pathway between the groundwater and the surface water, then you're right, we may end up having additional discussions about it, but it's a requirement for us to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's our landfill.
I understand that, but how's that contamination? It's clay line right now, gonna get down to the water aquifer. The freshwater aquifer is below that.
And maybe you know that better than I, but I don't know that.
I'm just telling you from experience, you're opening up a can of worms. When a DEQ comes in, just like an oil spill, okay, they have to have probable cause and say, here, we've sampled water here and you have contamination here, so we have to know where this flow's coming from. What you're telling me is right now, we're gonna go ahead and drill these holes to prove that there's no contamination going into the groundwater, which doesn't make any sense at all. They have to prove to you that it's going in the groundwater somewhere. If you cap that line off and you drill wells along the river and there's nothing in the soil, that means nothing is leaking from there. I wouldn't go into the dump and start drilling monitor wells. It's a waste of money.
John, would it be appropriate to say that where these are being this is being recommended by Eagle, that we do this under the current regulations? And I guess if the commission is uncertain of that, we could request some written documentation from Eagle about why this is being required and where they're recommending it and what they see as the course of action, so that you have the information from Eagle, if that would make you more comfortable with it.
I would like to see that. I think the whole commission would like to see that.
Commissioner Kulik.
I'd like to postpone this to the next meeting and ask that we get a map showing us the boundary of the old landfill and where Eagle is proposing that we do these monitoring wells.
The challenge you have is this was part of the whole consent calendar, so how do you postpone one item in the consent
I
calendar?
was gonna say, I'm not sure you can postpone something that you've left on the consent calendar, because it's now part of that whole thing. You would have needed to remove it and then could have discussed it at that point.
So what's the way to do it now?
Because you already, decided not to remove it, I guess you could make a motion, if everybody was in agreement, to remove that from the consent calendar at this point.
I move to remove it from the consent calendar.
Support.
Discussion.
John, was that a recommendation from Eagle or a requirement?
There are some Michigan laws now that require the assurance that there's not a pathway between this contaminated groundwater and surface water, the river. We did have pipes, and to Commissioner Tolus's point, we capped those pipes, but of course that begs the question, because now if the water's flow is stopped, where's it going to? What's happening to that water? Because it did have contaminants in it. So they're saying to us, so you tell us what's going. And the way to start is to say, what's over here, and is it getting to over here? Yes, the Eagle, there's like a short book on what you're supposed to do. Our AKT Peerless was saying, here's how we think we can solve this problem at the least possible cost and not let it get away from us. And this is that step. Now, if in fact we have a lot of pollution that's making it to the river, then we'll have to take additional steps. But there's nothing to say that's the case right now.
So Eagle didn't make it a requirement?
No.
It's state regulation that is a requirement.
Yeah, and
to
Eagle's
ensure
telling
that-
us you still need to finish the rest of this puzzle.
Right.
In terms of you cork the pipe, so where's the water going?
Commissioner Ling.
Do we have a motion on the floor at this point that would be to remove this from that's a parliamentary inquiry, that's what's on the floor is,
And then you could discuss this
to
more
remove
when
this.
we get to that.
okay.
Sorry.
So the question that I want to ask the city manager, I think is relevant to that amendment, which is there a timeline here? We're talking about having Peerless come in and do this work. If we approve this, but then afterwards said, we'd like Peerless to consult with the DPW, perhaps yourself, and then maybe issue a report to the commission on why this is the best way to do it, would we have time to do that, or are we on a timeline at this point?
We don't have a specific timeline from Eagle of when this has to be done. We were trying to get as much of the work done before the weather turned too bad, but I don't think 2 weeks would throw us off too far in that.
Commissioner Ling.
I guess the only other thing I would say is I want this work to be done. I understand, I certainly know geologists don't understand capping oil wells or landfills. I do think it's important for us to know what's happening with those chemicals. And there's a lot of concern about things that are going in the water that we didn't know decades ago would happen or was a problem, and now we do. So whether we were grandfathered in or not wouldn't make me feel any better about finding out what's happening. So I am in favor of doing this. If we can take this off, wait 2 weeks in order to just get some additional information and not cause any problem, I'm okay with that. But I don't want to see it postponed unnecessarily, because I think we are potentially talking about some problems that the community would be concerned about.
I would add, I think the testing seems necessary. I think the justification has been laid out to the commission thus far. But I have no problem with getting further information about the plans and what's going to happen going forward. So my concern is, like yours, Commissioner Ling, is postponement, but really why? Commissioner Toles.
One more quick point. The whole premise is they're telling you, well, we can come in and solve this problem. I would like to see something from Eagle stating what the problem is and what you have to do. Once you drill these holes, I guarantee you, once you drill the holes in the landfill and you find contamination there, the next thing they're gonna have you drill is drill the river along the basis of the river. It's guaranteed. So now you spent $30,000 to do this, and now you're gonna have to spend X amount of dollars to drill the river. Why don't you drill the river first? And you don't have a direction from the Eagle. Eagle's gonna give you the direction of what they want you to do. And then you can either challenge that or you can do it. I mean, you're just hiring a vendor to spend $30,000 for what? I can tell you're gonna find contamination in that old dump. There's no doubt about it. But once you find that, that's not gonna determine where your ground flow is gonna go. You're gonna have to drill wells near the river or that perimeter, because that's the way the ground flow is going, to see if there's anything there. So why go to step A when you can go right to step B and see if there is leakage on that edge? It only makes common sense to me, but
And I think the maps that Commissioner Kulik talked about will help identify where those wells will be drilled to know if we're doing step A or step B. I think that will help it explain it a bit better.
Any further discussion? I'm just reminding, we're voting on to postpone.
You're voting on removing it from the consent
Oh,
calendar.
that's right. We're voting to remove 6B from the consent calendar. So, all those in favor of removing 6B from the consent calendar, please vote by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, the same. So that motion passes unanimously. So I think we'll move into approving the rest of the consent calendar, if I could move to approve the rest.
I think you've got a motion and a second on the floor to do that, parliamentarian.
Correct. On that motion, is there any further discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent calendar, please vote aye. And those opposed, the same. So that motion passes unanimously. So that brings us to item 6B. Commissioner Kulik.
Move that we postpone this until our next meeting and ask that we be given some maps showing where the proposed drilling will take place and where the boundary of the old landfill are located.
Commissioner Malone. Discussion? Does that fulfill the inquiry that you have, Commissioner Toles? Because I know you mentioned you wanted something from Eagle.
I'd like to see something from Eagle, what they're requiring the city to do. All you're saying is you're going to AKA Peerless, and we're gonna show you a map of where we're gonna drill monitor holes. That doesn't mean anything to me, we're gonna drill the holes. I wanna know what the DEQ or Eagle is requiring right now. I wanna see it down in black and white before we go ahead and implement spending money on drilling holes that might be needless to start with.
Vice Mayor Gillis?
I also have concerns about the Chippewa River behind McGurk's building. A huge area contaminated behind where the brewing company used to be in McGurk's. The last time I was back there, they had several outfits where they were letting the methane gas escape because of the contamination. And what was along the riverfront there was just a silt fence, a black silt fence. And looking at the map, because I just brought it up on Google Maps, Chippewa River goes right through that contamination before it even comes down by the old landfill. So there must be some interest in finding out if the Chippewa River is contaminated farther up when they start looking into this. Because there is been contamination supposedly that had been dealt with. When I looked at this, because I go back there about every year to look at how badly that's been contaminated. And so I'm wondering if that has also, I don't want them to find out something and think it's coming from our landfill, where it's actually coming upriver, where there's already obviously a lot of contamination going. In fact, that area is eventually going to be completely vacated because of who bought it and for the liability effects. So.
And that area she's talking about is under order from DEQ or Eagle right now, and so they're familiar with everything that's going on at that site and what impact that may have, correct?
Yes, there are many, many test wells in that area, and there's some remediation wells at areas under remediation right now.
And that area is downstream from the location of our old landfill, correct?
So it's upstream.
No, it's downstream. The river's flowing north there.
Some is upstream, some is right across the river.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah.
There's McGurk's.
So
There's the old landfill.
The water's flowing north. It's downstream from where the old landfill was.
No, the Chippewa flows north, yeah.
Yes.
So it'd go by this contaminated land before it comes down around our landfill.
Oh, you're right, I was thinking down by the Pickens field.
Yes.
You're right, sorry.
Commissioner Tobulus.
Quick comment on that. That old property has slurry walls that are done before the river, that are dug, that catch anything before it can even get to the river, and you'll see there's pumping systems there that are filtering out the fluids. So, I mean, there's concrete slurry walls there that prevent anything from going into the river that was required by the DEQ to put in there.
Thank you. I'd like to bring the discussion, though, back to 6B specifically. Obviously, I share any environmental concerns that happen with the river, and I think the rest of the commission feels similar. But we have an item in front of us that we need to focus on.
Yeah, just wanted to fill in all the holes in the information. There's nothing wrong with sharing information you have with other city commissioners, because I've lived here all my life. So I'm just trying to fill in.
Sure.
For you, yourself, because I suppose you didn't know that either, right? So, just trying to fill in information.
Thank you, Commissioner Gillis. So, in terms of 6B, we're on the motion of getting some maps from our consultant. Any other discussion on that item? Commissioner Lane.
I guess I was just writing down what I think it is that's been raised and what we need information on. And I think that what's been raised is this going to create a problem that's not already there? Is drilling holes going to create a problem? And if not, why do we not need to? I'm not as concerned, but like I said, it's not an area of expertise, but I think what's been raised is it going to create a problem that's not there? So I guess I'm looking for the environmental specialist to tell us this is why this is not going to cause a problem, and this is the information, this is the necessary information that we need in order to determine whether or not potentially there's a problem that could end up in the river if we don't do this. Does that make sense?
I guess my question would be, there's been some discussion about Eagle as well. The only thing I have right now is to receive maps of the drill holes and boundaries of the landfill. So if there was more to that motion, Tony would need to be okay with that.
I have no problem adding to that motion justification from the consultant as to why drilling holes in a capped landfill will not create future problems.
And what about Eagle?
And Eagle, you have to put them in there too.
Would it be simpler to say, postpone until the next meeting to receive further information from both the consultant and Eagle?
Yes.
And then,
But I want to be specific about what the
Specifics.
commission's looking for, so that we don't get here in 2 weeks and say, oh, I wanted this as well. So I don't want it to be that generic, so that we don't miss something.
Right.
if you want the specifics in the motion, yeah, then we meet. So right now, we've got received maps of drill holes and boundaries of the landfill, and what?
Justification as to why drilling holes in a capped landfill will not create future problems? Sort of? Close enough?
Right? Yes, close enough.
Anything from Eagle?
Is Commissioner Tolles?
I'd like one other thing added to that. I'd just like to know if we're trying to determine whether contamination from there can get into the aquifer, or are we looking to see if contamination is flowing into the river? You know, we're talking about two different things.
I guess I would ask, does Tony has to be okay with that part of the motion, correct? Or is that
A little more than what that was.
right?
Can we do, you were the second on my original, are you okay with what I added?
The second time, we're not talking about what Pete wants.
No, right, it's just up to what Pete wanted.
Yes.
We'll take this a bite at a time.
Right.
Yes, I'm okay with it.
Okay, so we still have a second for the amendment, for my amendment. Now Commissioner Tolis is looking for an amendment to the amendment.
Well, you're just doing friendly amendments.
Okay, we're doing friendly amendments.
Right. Do we need a second for Commissioner Tolis's?
He has one, Commissioner Malone.
Okay.
That's the maker and the seconder. You're now just tweaking his motion, if that's what you're doing.
Okay. Can you read back the motion that we
have
have?
so far.
Yes.
Postpone until the next meeting to receive maps of drill holes and boundaries of landfill, along with justification to drilling holes in the capped landfill, and that will not cause future problems.
And
Yeah, I believe there's an additional,
confirmation that, I wrote, confirmation that information regarding the aquifer or the contamination is flowing into the river.
Regarding if the aquifer is flowing into the river.
Regarding whether the aquifer is being contaminated or the river. Is that a good summary of it, Commissioner Tolis?
I was just repeating what Mr. Lang was saying. He's saying they want to be assured that nothing's leaking from the old dump into the water aquifer, which is below it. Okay? Now, is the DEQ requiring that, or are they requiring to see nothing is leaching into the river? I mean, it's two different things. It's very simple. Very simple. And drilling holes into that sealed dump is not going to cure any problems. It's just going to create more problems, is what I'm trying to tell you. That's not required by the DEQ. We don't have a letter to that effect yet. The contractor is telling you, yeah, we want to drill holes into the landfill. That's a contractor. That's what they make money doing, is drilling holes and testing.
Jeremy, can you read back the motion?
I can try here, yes. Postpone until next meeting to receive maps of drill holes and boundaries of landfill, along with justification to drilling holes in the capped landfill and assurance that will not cause future problems, and confirmation that the information regarding if the aquifer or river is being contaminated.
Okay. I think that covers, to me, that seems like it covers all the concerns that have been raised. And the,
Because it seems the same thing to me. We should be drilling by the river to see if it's flowing through the river. That would seem like an easy test, rather than boring through a sealed dump.
Absolutely. And then once you bore through it, you can try to reseal it, but you're never going to get a seal on it.
so I have a question for staff. Do we believe that that would be possible by our next meeting, to get all that information from Eagle and the consultant?
Yes, we believe so.
Is there any further discussion on this, on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same. So that motion passes unanimously
Postpone.
to postpone. So now we are at the original motion as amended. Discussion?
I'm not sure.
Or no? Right, so
Yeah, you're good.
we're good, yeah,
Pass the postponement.
yeah,
Okay.
okay. Okay. Next on our agenda is item number 8, which is to consider a resolution in support of the 2020 census. Commissioner Kulik.
I move the resolution and request that the city manager read it for our folks in television land.
I would add a discussion that the resolution is pretty lengthy. Do we, you okay with reading? Okay. I guess all those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, the same. And it's unanimous.
So the resolution is entitled, Resolution Recognizing the Importance of the 2020 Census and Encouraging Residents of the City of Mount Pleasant to Promote and Complete the Census to Ensure a Fair and Complete Count. Whereas the U.S. Census Bureau is required by Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution to conduct an accurate count of the population every 10 years. And whereas the next enumeration will be April 1st, 2020, and will be the first to rely heavily on online responses. And whereas the primary and perpetual challenge facing the U.S. Census Bureau is the undercount of certain hard-to-count population groups. And whereas the City of Mount Pleasant has a large percentage of individuals that are considered traditionally hard to count. And whereas these diverse communities and demographic populations are at risk of being missed in the 2020 census. And whereas the City of Mount Pleasant receives federal funding that relies in part on census data. And whereas a complete and accurate count of the City of Mount Pleasant population is essential. And whereas the data collected by the decennial census determines the number of seats each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives and is used to distribute billions of dollars in federal funds to state and local governments. And whereas the data is also used in the redistricting of state legislatures, county boards of supervisors, and city councils. And whereas the decennial census is a massive undertaking that requires cross-sector collaboration and partnership in order to achieve a complete and accurate count. And whereas the City of Mount Pleasant's leaders have made it a priority that every citizen is counted once, only once, and in the right place. And whereas this includes coordination between city, county, tribal, state governments, community-based organizations, education, and many more. And whereas the U.S. Census Bureau is facing several challenges with Census 2020, including constrained fiscal environment, rapidly changing use of technology, declining response rates, increasingly diverse and mobile population, thus support from partners and stakeholders is critical. And whereas the City of Mount Pleasant, in partnership with other local governments, the state, businesses, schools, and community organizations, is committed to robust outreach and communication strategies, focusing on reaching the hardest to count individuals. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Mount Pleasant recognizes the importance of the 2020 U.S. Census and supports helping to ensure a complete, fair, and accurate count of all residents of the City of Mount Pleasant.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item number 11, which is consider amendment to a prior approval for the purchase of self-unloading trailers and appropriate budget amendment for the same. Manager Ridley, would you like to introduce us?
Yes, earlier this year you approved the purchase of 2 trailers to be owned by the city, but to be used by our contracted recycling curbside pickup hauler. And those 2 trailers were being purchased to increase efficiency as well as increase safety when the materials are dropped off at the material recovery facility. At the time, we recommended 1 trailer that had containers in it and 1 that was more of a flatbed trailer. Since that time, we've learned that MMI, our current contractor, when they use a flatbed trailer, they actually strap containers to the side of the trailer to do some of the sorting. And so it's really, in order to meet our goals of efficiency and safety, it's really important to have 2 trailers that both have containers in them. So Protainer, who was the bidder on the 1 trailer with containers, has agreed to hold their price of $14,400 for a second trailer. So we're recommending the purchase of 2 of the trailers with containers for a total cost of $28,800 and an additional budget amendment of $7,850 to cover that additional cost of the trailer with the containers.
Commissioner Kulik,
Move the approval.
second by Commissioner Perschbacher. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 12 is to confirm road salt purchase from the State of Michigan My Deal Extended Purchasing Program and a budget amendment for the same. Manager Ridley?
Again, earlier this year, you provided authorization for us to commit to a delivery of up to 500 tons of road salt for delivery this year, and then an additional up to 800 tons as part of the seasonal delivery after the first of the year. And both purchases were through the State of Michigan contract. And at the time of the approval, we did not have pricing because they were still in the bidding process. As the memo indicates, when we entered our commitments, we made an error and instead committed to buying 800 tons for early delivery and 500 tons as the seasonal backup. So the salt has been delivered and is in the salt barn, and it was when we went to process the payment that we realized we received 800 tons instead of the 500 tons that we originally had anticipated. From a good news standpoint, the early delivery price is lower than the seasonal delivery price. So actually, over the 2 years, this error in our entry will actually end up saving a little bit of funds for the city. But before we can make the payment, we need you to confirm after the fact the approval of the 800 tons that were delivered and approve the appropriate budget amendment for this year, please.
Commissioner Kulik?
Move to confirm the purchase of 800 tons of road salt for early delivery and the appropriate budget amendments.
Seconded by Commissioner Tolas. Any discussion? Commissioner Tolas?
I see there's a transpose numbers that were mixed up. Instead of ordering 500, we ordered 800 tons. I don't think really that's a problem. Salt's not gonna spoil. Also, the city buys that under a municipal discount, which is about $38 a ton cheaper than private individual companies like me buy it, so.
Yeah. I would add that because we bought it earlier, we're actually going to be saving more money in the long run. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, the same. That is unanimous. Next on our agenda is item number 13, which is to consider a closed session pursuant to subsection AE of the Open Meetings Act to consult with counsel regarding pending litigation, Fisher Transportation Company et al. V. Union Township et al. I believe we just go straight to a roll call vote. Need a motion? Commissioner Ling and Commissioner Kulik.
Second.
I'll take the roll call.
Commissioner Kulik,
Yay.
Commissioner Lalo,
Yes.
Commissioner Ling,
Yes.
Commissioner Perschbacher,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolas,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gillis,
Yes.
Mayor Joseph,
Yes.
motion passes.
Next on our agenda is item number 15, which was added to the agenda this evening to discuss sanitary sewer lines. Commissioner Kulik.
Jeremy, would you read that section of the sewer code that's creating the problem, please? I believe it's 51.04,
Sure.
although I thought it was 50.40, but there's a few numbers among friends.
51.040, separate building sewer for each building. A separate and independent building sewer lead shall be provided for every building, except where one building stands at the rear of another on an interior lot, and no private sewer is available or can be constructed to the rear through an adjoining alley, courtyard, or driveway. The building sewer from the front building may be extended to the rear building, and the whole considered as one building sewer. Other exceptions will be allowed only by special permission granted by the manager.
The problem that exists is the property that's behind me that fronts on Kinney Street. The sewer line failed from the main house, and the sewer line from the main house connects in the alley. And there's a garage apartment back there, and the garage apartment sewer line connected to the sewer line for the house. That ordinance now requires that there be a separate sewer line from the main house to the alley and from the garage apartment to the alley, rather than being able to tee them together in the backyard. Now, that's usually not much of a problem, except last year the neighborhood requested a special assessment to redo that alley because it was in such bad shape that either it was going to have to be special assessed and paved, or it was going to be pulverized and removed. We haven't even paid for that alley yet. I was talking to the contractor this evening, and he said, yes, we're going to have to tear open that alley, cut into the brand new asphalt, and put a sewer line in there where if you put a T in there, or a Y actually it would be rather than a T, it would flow just as it has for the past 60, 80 years, however long that garage apartment has been there. The other problem is that this alley was constructed somewhat unusual in that usually when they put an alley in, they crown it so that when the water goes on the alley, it flows off the sides. This alley was built sort of V-shaped, so the water runs to the center of the alley and then runs to each end of the alley. I contend that cutting into that alley, that drainage will never properly work again. What I'm hoping is that we can slow the project down a little bit with the contractor and have the city manager investigate whether or not this would be a good time to provide an exception for the rule of the ordinance. The ordinance clearly gives her the ability to make that exception. And I'll start babbling and see if people have any questions.
Are you making a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion that the city manager investigate the situation and, if possible, grant a waiver. Now, some of this is going to have to be done very quickly. Somebody's going to have to get out there to the contractor tomorrow morning and say, whoa, cool your jets just a little bit.
So I believe we need a second for that motion. Commissioner Lalone? Discussion. Commissioner Cooley?
If this was a year ago and the alley was in the condition it was before they repaved it, I would have no problems with providing the 2 leads there. If this was a gravel alley, I would have no problems with the 2 leads. The fact that this asphalt is, I want to say, barely cooled, provides a problem that the residents along the alley that are paying for the special assessment are going to have an inferior product because that alley's the pavement's been cut into.
Commissioner Toles?
Again, this took place in another instance that I was involved in on Cross Lanes, where they had a resident that their sewer failed. They dug it up, and the house next door was tapped into the same line that they ran out into the street. And I think that's where the problem is in this ordinance. Again, it's saying if there's another building, additional building on the property. So what happens if you have an unattached garage that has a drainage system in it? So that's got to have a separate sewer line? It doesn't make sense. I think this was trying to prevent, just like that instance on Cross Lane where you had a house, and instead of digging up the street again, they just tapped over the other house on the Y and ran it into their line. So when that lady had to replace her line, they had to disconnect the other line next door, and they had to run another line. And I think that's the purpose of the ordinance, but the way that ordinance reads, it says any other building, if I'm not mistaken, what you read.
I think we're talking about now about 2 different things, though. I mean, I understand your concern, Commissioner Toles, that you have maybe a problem with how the ordinance is written, but I think Tony's motion is about providing an exception for this one household.
I understand that, but again, we're back to the ordinance.
Right.
It's not clear and doesn't make sense. if you have a house and you had a garage house behind it, they're on the same parcel of property. They should be allowed to hook into the same line. You shouldn't have to have two separate sewer lines.
Sure. Commissioner Kulik?
I can understand in most situations why you wouldn't want two buildings hooked up to the same sewer line, that I'm paying the bill and something happens and you're tied into that sewer line, you're my neighbor. This is one property. The property can never be split because of the zoning ordinance. You'll never be able to have one owner in the front and the garage apartment in the back on separate ownership, because the zoning ordinance will not allow that sort of a split. I don't really know how they're billed, whether they're billed to the renters or billed to the property maintenance company that manages it, but at this location, you know, the problem is we write an ordinance that's good 99.9% of the time, and then you get the, here's a potential problem. And as Commissioner Toles would say, sometimes common sense needs to come and say, we need a tweak here, and the ordinance has the exception in there that allows the manager to grant an exception when it's appropriate. And I think this is a time when it would be appropriate.
Commissioner LeBlanc?
What we're deciding right now is just to have Nancy look into it, right? It's not up to us as far as whether anyone gets an exception. It's up to Nancy, correct? We're just asking her to look into it.
If we decide we want Nancy to look into it and make an exception.
No, we're not telling her to make an exception. We're telling her to look into it and see if it's appropriate to make the exception. We're not saying, Nancy, this is the exception, do it. We're saying, Nancy, look into it and see if it's appropriate.
And I think the intent is that every building has its own sewer line, so that if I live in one of the buildings and I create problems in my sewer line, the person in the other building isn't impacted by that. So everybody is responsible for their own sewer line is the intent of it. And when we've considered exceptions to this in prior circumstances, it's typically been the property owner coming to us and asking for an exception and justifying why they think that exception should exist for them to be able to share a sewer line. I don't know obviously there's one property owner here, but it's two different rental units with two different renters in those. So we can certainly look into it, see what the justification may or may not be to share a sewer line, and evaluate it based on the other exceptions we may have made in the past. But we would need to make sure the property owner is interested in asking for the exception as well.
Commissioner Kulik?
I assume if an exception is granted, part of that requirement could be that additional cleanouts be provided between the garage apartment and the sewer line and the big house and the sewer line. So it's easy to get at. If you get a plug down there, you can jet it out or router it out or whatever it is, and solve that problem that, you know, I'm not dumping Pampers down there and plugging it up on everybody.
And I guess the other thing I was going to indicate, just obviously all this is new, but typically when someone cuts into a city road or a city alley, they're responsible for restoring it to good condition. And I share your concern, it's brand new pavement, but even if it is constructed a little bit differently than how things typically are, that contractor is going to be responsible for making sure it's put back in the same condition and it flows the way it was intended to. So there will be some responsibility that we'll be checking to make sure they follow through on that. But you're right, it's unfortunate, it's brand new pavement that they'll be cutting into already.
If you get a chance, talk to Stacy about the problem they had getting that alley to drain properly this summer. They were out there several times. They had to bring this special machine in from Central Asphalt to reheat the asphalt and remove it and move it around to get it to flow better. It wasn't an easy task.
Commissioner Lynn?
The issue that Commissioner Malone brought up about what are we actually saying here, and are we leaving this decision to the city manager, is the same issue that I share. the item that was put on the agenda was to discuss the situation. And that's all I'm comfortable with, is discussing the situation in order to point out that there are some unusual circumstances here, and do those unusual circumstances indicate that maybe this should be handled in a different way. But I think it's entirely up to the city manager and what the interpretation of what the ordinance says to determine that. And so if I'm understanding the description of the problem, this is supposed to start tomorrow, this project is supposed to start tomorrow?
They dug up the backyard today and found out that there were the two sewer lines and only one lead into the sewer. Apparently they were in contact with DPW, said, no, you have to do two separate leads, which means you're gonna have to cut open that alley. That sewer at that location, I think, is 10 feet down, 12 feet down, is a deep sewer at that location. So in order to get to it and to provide the protection for cave-in and things like that, you're gonna be taking out a bunch of that alley. It's not just a simple cut and get in there. So there's another issue.
Commissioner Lee?
So if I'm understanding that correctly, this just came up, that came up today?
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess the question I would ask, without putting the city manager on the spot, is, are you uncomfortable with our asking that the situation be looked at to determine whether or not there's any basis for handling it differently?
I don't think so. Like I said, this is the first time where it's come from you asking us to make an exception instead of the property owner. But I think I would still use the same criteria in evaluating the exception, but it would certainly be dependent on the property owner being interested in having the exception.
So, Commissioner Kulik, this is obviously a neighbor of yours. Do you think they'd be interested in?
I didn't talk to the property owner. I was talking to the contractor, and he's saying we're going to be cutting into this brand new. I said, well, that just doesn't make any sense at all, that you're going to got asphalt down there that's, less than 2 months old. Now you're going to be cutting out a big old chunk of it so you can add one new sewer lead to it. I mean, if that was the case, they should have dug up the whole sewer line before the alley was done, put a new sewer line in, and provided leads all the way down there, but that wasn't done. So my gut feeling is it's going to be cheaper for the property owner behind me to just have that one lead with a Y in it and maybe some additional cleanouts than it is to cut open that alley and be responsible for repaving it, compacting it, repaving it, getting it to drain properly, coming back in the spring after everything settles and it's all out of whack again, and patching it again and re-leveling it. That could get real expensive real quick.
And I obviously don't know the details of it, but you're saying it's already in a Y, so one piece of it has failed, but one piece is still functioning appropriately? Is that what
It's
told
dug
you?
up to both buildings right now. There's no sewage coming from either building at this point.
Because it seems like they're gonna have to cut into the alley regardless to fix.
No, the lead coming from the sewer in the alley is back beyond the pavement in the alley. It's east of the alley pavement, and that part of it has not failed. So they're just talking about putting a Fernco coupling on there and hooking things back up.
Vice Mayor Gillis?
My concerns, Manager Ridley, is setting precedents, being that a commissioner brought this forward rather than the homeowner. It may look like some sort of favoritism. I know the alley, when it was done, it came in over budget, and the city absorbed that over budget rather than redistributing the assessment to the property owners. I don't know if any other commissioners recall that. So we've already done over and above a favor to those residents by covering the extra costs when the assessments didn't cover that contingency and it came in over budget, we absorbed that. And I don't want it to look like we are doing something different for one homeowner that may be located right next to a city commissioner versus someone else that may have the same situation. And I do believe that if we continuously make adjustments or exceptions to our zoning ordinance, we're kind of chopping it up for some people and not others. If the contractor cannot find a way to accommodate the flow that is working now by cutting into it, we need to get a new contractor. So we should be able to, there's going to probably be someone in that alley that's gonna have that same situation. They're gonna ask for the same consideration and allowances that we are now giving this homeowner, who unfortunately is not asking us. It is a commissioner that's asking the manager. We don't have a ZBA that addresses this, and as the ordinance is written, it is just by the manager.
It is not part of the zoning ordinance,
Or
Vice Mayor. This is the sewer
the
ordinance.
sewer ordinance. So it doesn't go to a ZBA, and we don't go to the sewer committee that,
There is a sanitary sewer board of appeals, but for whatever reason, the way this section of the ordinance is written, it allows the city manager to make an exception instead of going to the board of appeals. I don't know the history of why that is.
okay, that's what I thought I remembered.
Commissioner Coolidge.
There is one other garage apartment on that alley. That garage apartment was rebuilt 2 years ago before the alley was repaved. They did open up the alley and provide a separate sanitary sewer line for that alley. There should be no other reasons that you would need a second sanitary sewer line on that entire alley. There's no other, there's just the 2 garage apartments. One of them already has 2 leads that was put in before the alley was repaved. The second one, it's been there for 60, 70 years, however long that garage apartment's been there. Hasn't been a problem. Where the sewer line failed was between the main house and the Y at the garage apartment.
Further discussion? I would like to say that I think I'm hearing more about this problem, and I think that I'm become more comfortable with the idea of and in favor of this motion, because although I know Vice Mayor Gills brought up some concerns, but I think that the concern here is really towards the alleyway we just pay for. All the citizens of the city are responsible for part of that being built, and so it seems like a good investment to protect that as much as we can. And this in no way provides immediate, immediate solution that necessarily they're going to get an exception. This is just saying, look into it. And so I think I'm comfortable with allowing the city manager and staff to look into this issue and say whether or not an exception should be allowed.
Mayor?
Yes.
Can I read the motion to make sure that?
Yes,
we're on the
please.
same page?
Yes, please.
So I have request that the city manager investigate the sewer connection situation in the alley, and if possible and appropriate, grant an exception on the sewer connection as per the ordinance.
I guess, Commissioner Llewellyn.
I feel like the wording of that implies that there will be an exception. I prefer it was a little more clear that we are letting Nancy and staff decide whether or not to do one. We're not encouraging something one way or the other. To me, that feels like we're pushing one or the other.
Could you read the motion again, just to?
Request that the city manager investigate the sewer connection situation in the alley, and if possible and appropriate, grant an exception on the sewer connection as per the ordinance.
I'm willing to take the word possible out of that motion if that helps people. If
and
appropriate.
if appropriate, grant an exception.
Does that settle concerns?
That's better.
Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Lynn?
I guess I do want to ask the city manager if there's any discomfort with that.
Not that I know of right now, but obviously there's a lot of details about the situation that I don't know that we know all of those yet. So based on what I know about the situation, I know about what you're expecting, I don't think I'm uncomfortable right now.
I guess I would like to add maybe a friendly amendment to this and say that the city manager provide a report to the commission on the situation and the basis for the decision either way.
I'm comfortable with that.
Provide a report and basis of the,
Basis of the decision?
Either the approval or the denial, yeah.
Correct, yeah.
approval or denial.
Any further discussion? I guess we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, the same?
Nay.
So that motion passes 6-1. Okay. Next on our agenda is announcements on city-related issues and new business. Commissioner Cooler.
To remind people that Thursday is Halloween, 6 until 8. And leaf pickup is going on, starting this week. Don't rake your leaves out too early because it plugs up all the storm sewers and we've got rain coming. So if you're not gonna get scooped up until next week,
Yes, the 11th.
the 11th, keep them out of the catch basin if possible.
I would like to remind the public that ICRH, Isabella County Restoration House, which is the temporary homeless shelter for Isabella County, opened this past weekend. And if you know people who are in need, to direct them to 120 South Pine Street. And I believe they do intake around 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and people can come in earlier and get registered and begin to get the services that they need in the afternoon. Also if you're interested in volunteering, ICRH depends on volunteers to provide those services. And also I'd like to remind the public that on November 7th, the International Relations Council, which supports our sister city relationship with Okaya, Japan, is having their annual banquet to fundraise. And tickets are available for $25 for kids and $30 for adults. Commissioner Toles.
I got one correction or comment to make on our October 4th end of the week report that was sent to all the commissioners regarding Bob's Barber Shop. I received a call from Mr. Bill Cook, the owner of Bob's Barber Shop, and it says the owner contacted us in 2017 about wanting to replace the existing blade sign. The zoning ordinance at the time did not allow the blade sign. He has called me twice since then. He brought in a design for the sign, and it was allowed back then from what he's telling me. And he went ahead and designed the sign, and it took a while. I think Wilson Steel Fab was making the steel part of it to go on his facade, and then Maury's logo was doing the other part of it. And then when he went back to get a permit, the new zoning ordinance took effect, and they told him, no, you couldn't put it up. So, just trying to correct that.
Commissioner Ling.
I'd like to mention that the League of Women Voters is having a program tomorrow night, the 29th, out at Mid-Michigan Community College at 6:30. And it's going to be an opportunity for residents to learn about 3 important things that are happening. There's going to be 2 presentations dealing with ballot proposals from last November. One, an explanation of the redistricting proposal and the application process for becoming part of the new commission that's being established that will be in charge of doing the redistricting in 2022. The second item will be on the proposal 3 and on what the implications are for voting rights and how that affects voters. And the third one will be on the importance of the census and answer questions or concerns that people may have about the census. So if you're interested in any of those 3 topics, the meeting is at Mid-Michigan Community College in the community room at 6:30 tomorrow night. Mid here.
Vice Mayor Gillis.
I would like to ask the public if you're interested in becoming more involved in city government. We have some vacancies on 3 different boards. As a chair of the appointments committee, we will be making these appointments probably in the next month. So I wanted to let you know, we will be making a Parks and Recreation Commission appointment, the Isabella County Material Recovery Facility, that's the recycling center, and the City CMU Student Liaison Committee. So if you're interested in any of those committees, please look online at mountpleasant.org under boards and commissions. The application's there, and please send us your application. We'd love to have you join our team. Also, I want to remind the public, the voting public, that November 5th is Election Day. Not in all counties or townships and municipalities, but in Mount Pleasant, we are having a vote on November 5th for City Commission and a proposal for a marijuana ordinance. Please research your candidates and find out what they're all about and what they support. And just so that you know, we do have 2 seats that will be open and 5 candidates. On MAC TV, you can find our League of Women Voters debate, where you can learn a little bit more about those candidates. And also in the Morning Sun, there was a write-up. And some of them also have Facebook city commission candidate pages, so you can learn more about them. And I'm sure anyone would love to talk to you, so if you find their phone number, please feel free to reach out. 2 commission seats will become available. That does not mean you have to vote for 2 candidates. If you have one candidate that you clearly support and are not sure about the other 4, please know that you can just choose 1 city commission candidate and not have to mark 2. That second vote that you may be giving to someone that you aren't impressed with or excited about may be the vote that makes that candidate become part of the commission. So choose your votes wisely. It's a very important decision. And remember, November 5th. Thank you.
Seeing no other announcements or new business, we'll move into the public comment on agenda or non-agenda items. This is when public can comment on city-related business. Please come to the podium, state your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes. Seeing no one come forward, I will now close the public comment section. And we will recess for a closed session in conference room E. I would like to let the staff know, or the public know, and the press, that we will be back out for an action item after our closed section. And we obviously have a work session upstairs later after that. We'll bring us back out of recess and to consider item number 15, which is to consider a recommendation from the city attorney regarding pending litigation. Oh, right, that's item number 16. I apologize. Thank you.
Nancy, summary?
So I think what we would be looking for you this evening is for you to authorize the city attorney to execute the consent to vacate part of the recorded plat in regard to the Fisher versus Union Township et al. Lawsuit.
Commissioner Cooley.
So moved. For the people out in TV land, this property is in Union Township, and the only reason it affects the city is that we own property, which is the park that's within 300 feet of the proposed vacation.
I have a second from Commissioner Perschbacher. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, the same. So that is unanimous. And we will now recess for a work session in conference room A upstairs to discuss the proposed 2020 operating budget.
Steve's good? All right. We will start our work session on the 2020 budget. I believe we'll let Nancy start us off.
The good news is we're going to remove one additional item from our discussion this evening and defer it to your next meeting. And that's under the downtown related items, item number 3, the marketing funds. And the reason we're suggesting that be moved is the downtown TIFA board had a meeting this morning and voted to make a recommendation to you regarding the utilization of the $80,000 of funds that were allocated to the TIFA for an economic incentive program. And I don't have all the details of their recommendation, but it has to do with additional marketing of the downtown. So I think it would make more sense for you to talk about all of the marketing at one time instead of talking about this little piece tonight and then talking about the TIFA recommendation in 2 weeks. So I'd like to suggest we defer that discussion on marketing until the November 11th meeting unless anybody has any objections.
Seeing no objections, I will pass.
So, looking at the 3 remaining downtown items that we have, the first one has to do with the proposed funding for some of the larger capital projects in downtown for 2020. And as I indicated in the work session packet, this is exactly what was approved in the in the capital improvement plan in June, in that the streetscape enhancements along Michigan Street would be under the new standards, for lack of a better word, which would include having stamped concrete instead of decorative brickwork, would have more of the pedestrian style lighting instead of the decorative poles, would not have built-in planters, would have fewer benches, and would have no irrigation. And then the pedestrian lighting and any alley reconstructions would be funded 70% by the property owners and 30% by the capital improvement plan. And again, I bring this up again just because it's a change in what we've done in prior years, and I just want to make sure that you're still comfortable with that approach for those downtown infrastructure projects.
Any questions, comments? Yeah.
I have a question about, and maybe I'm just misreading it, but I thought what I was reading was that we were gonna put pedestrian lighting on Michigan between Washington and Oak. But don't we already have pedestrian lighting there?
There is some existing lighting, but it's not at the typical standards, so it's not lit as well as the rest of downtown is. And so this would improve it, and unfortunately, it's not just a matter of inserting new poles to do it. It takes some reconfiguration of what is there.
But it's the poles that are already there. No,
Actually,
no.
we would be replacing the poles so that they're all the same
We'll be doing both sides of the street.
on both sides of the street.
That's right.
And that's on Oak.
It's on Michigan Street
Oh,
from
it's-
Oak to Washington.
The Blackstone, basically Kurt's Auto Service to the end of the parking lot of the Michigan building, something along.
And Michelle, can you explain a little bit better why we can't just add lights to get to the better lighting standards?
I will do my best. With the configuration, the placement, they are also offset, so in order to add them, everything has to shift that.
Or is 70% of that, and the capital improvement knowledge is 30% of it, which is different than any that we've done, is we could look at, as we do this special assessment role, providing some credit against the roll for the resale of the light poles or the reuse of the light poles somewhere else, so that we haven't done any I'm just brainstorming right on the spot, so I'm kind of looking at these guys as I say it, but maybe there's a way we could try to find some way to give some credit for those poles in some way to bring down the overall cost of the project.
And repurpose them? Yeah.
Yeah. Because it is unique and it's the only place we're replacing existing poles.
Those aluminum poles that we used there in the past,
Michelle, are they?
I'm sorry, what?
are they the aluminum poles that we have down there now?
They are aluminum, but they're not the same aluminum as what we have on Broadway and,
Yeah, or,
yeah, they're a completely different look.
So they're already different than what's on Broadway and
And also different from what we have in residential neighborhoods.
which are concrete poles.
I guess I didn't realize they were different than the existing Broadway and Main, because I was thinking we could repurpose them there somehow, but.
Are there any other concerns, comments? I think I'm gonna share Commissioner Lane's concern that's, these people got light, I wasn't aware that they weren't assessed for these lights to begin with.
They were made for,
Typically,
yeah.
Typically, and now we're gonna do a special assessment. This will come before the commission to approve the special assessment.
Oh, yeah, they'll have to have 2 public hearings on it before a special assessment can be done. But would you like us to look at a way to see about repurposing those poles and being able to give some credit for them? Would that make you more comfortable?
Yeah, at the least I'd like to have us do that. I guess I just think it's a different situation than we were putting in a whole project. And in all places where we've done it, where it was commercial versus residential, that we're just putting them in, we're not replacing. So it feels different to me.
The lights are currently on the south side, correct?
They're on both sides.
Both
They're on
sides.
Okay.
Okay, we can look at that. Are there any concerns on the streetscape enhancements or the alley reconstruction?
I didn't have any concerns, I think we're sort of we're reducing the cost, sort of fitting more in the neighborhood look to downtown, which I think most of that area, it's really more of a neighborhood than it is compared to some of the other areas in Toledo. But that'll probably change, in the next couple decades, probably. I'll look at it then. I think we can move on. It's getting nods.
So item number 2 in the downtown has to do with our favorite subject of tree lighting. We get to talk about it in
In 12 years, I think
Yes.
10 of those years we've talked about tree lighting. What's the point?
So I included Michelle's memo in the work session packet, which gives some of the history of what we've done and the problems that we've encountered with leaving those lights in the trees year-round, and a couple of different options of how to move forward as far as whether we want year-round lights, whether we want Christmas season lights, or whether we want no lights at all in the trees. And when we put the budget together, we put in the budget $22,500 because we were still working out all these numbers and these details. So we're looking for some guidance from you this evening on what you really want to do moving forward with the lights in the downtown street trees, so that we know which of these numbers is more appropriate as we move into 2020.
I just have a question. When we look at Michelle's memo, the first option says total every 2 years is $22,000, and then the second option says total $18,000. Is that a total for every year the cost is $18,000?
That one does. The first one though, the 22,000 is every 2 years, so if you spread it, it'd be 11,200 each year if you spread it out, plus the 7,500. So it comes out to 18,700 is what you would budget each year if you did it, if you budgeted it on an annual basis.
So we actually would save $100 by option 2.
But only have lights there for 3 of the months.
Right. That's, to be honest, my personal concern with option 2 is I thought January 15th pulling the lights was a little early. I guess I would rather see it, if we were gonna pull them every year, extended to like maybe February 15th.
So especially for leaving, or for having the other businesses probably leave off their lights.
Right, and a lot of them leave them up till, I think it's like April.
And I'm sorry, Mayor, I missed, under option 2, the annual cost, because there's a one-time cost in there of $2,700 to remove the current ones.
Right.
So the annual cost is actually $15,900 every year.
Okay.
So next year it would be 18,600, but after that it would be 15,900.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that I said that wrong. So, but what you were talking about is keep, under option 2, if we did that, keeping them on past January 15th.
Yeah.
With the light curtains, Michelle, right now, what is our recommendation of when the light curtains be turned off on your buildings, April 1? So why were you recommending January 15th for the street trees?
Because that's typically due to the end of the holiday season.
Yeah, I could see, I'm glad they're not gonna be on. I remember the whole discussion, I don't even remember exactly all the arguments on each side, but I do know that as I've driven through and watched the lights be on during certain parts of the year, I think they look very odd to be on, particularly when the leaves are in a certain, it just looks like it shouldn't be there, so I'm actually glad that we're not good. But I kind of agree with, Will, although, you know, yeah, technically the holiday season's over on the 15th. I don't take down my Christmas village until the first day of spring, but, I can see.
I'm gonna take the Christmas tree down the day after Christmas, so.
And I take all that stuff down, but I, you know, I think during the winter when it's snowy, it's kind of nice having the lights there, so I wouldn't mind if it was at least the end of January, before, or even, later, but I'm glad they're not gonna be all year. I think taking them down on the 15th, I'm very much in favor of the second proposal, and I hope that's it then. So, I think they look very nice, during the winter, when they were up. And the cost is about the same, and it looks like there's real advantages to taking them down each year after they leave them up, so. Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of that one, but maybe a little longer than that.
When I look at the number, because I'm always a number person, $18,000 for lights in a tree is just too expensive for my taste. I don't think they bring about so much of a festive ambiance for $18,000, and the fact that a lot of people end up cutting some of the lights. Some of them are strung haphazardly or not consistent from one tree to another. Even the taking and putting them on and then taking them off again does damage the trees. I mean, there's no way in the winter you're not going to damage trees by putting lights on and off. I think some alternative plan of decorating the trees without light fixtures might be where downtown businesses would sponsor decorating a tree in front of their business or two in front of their business. They put up decorations of their own liking. It might be some from their store, it might be Sacred Heart kids making ornaments to be put on a tree. I just think the amount of trouble it is to put them on and take them off, and the damage to the trees, and the inconsistency that it looks like haphazardly downtown when it's lit up, and the cost of $18,000 to do it, that money could be better well spent for something else for the holiday, or for something else that is needed rather than lights and trees. I'm just a little concerned about the cost and the fact that vandals continuously mess with the lights. I think it's funny to go up there and cut off the lights, and then you have one that's lit, the next one that isn't. And
So Lori, you're suggesting option number 3, which is just to remove the lights for 2,700?
yes. And not necessarily to leave the trees alone, but I think the wiring of the lights is damaging to the trees. And I think it's just another reason for somebody to go down and take what we've invested in and ruin it. So I think there's other ways that we can make those trees look festive without spending $18,000 to do it.
So, that's proposal 2. Proposal 2 would be initial cost of 18,600, and then after that would be 15,000 every year. That's what I'm, 15,900. And then the other one is 11,000 every year.
No, it's actually about 18,000 every year because you have to rehang them and replace them as well.
Investigate having somebody come in. I know there's services that will do it. Midland, in their downtown, they have somebody they contract with that comes in, puts all the lights up, takes them all down.
I think that's what we do.
I haven't spoken to Midland, I've spoken to Big Rapids, and it's about $37,000 a year. So it's substantially more.
I'm not a big fan of the lights year-round. I think they do look nice when we turn them on at beginning of the holiday season. We have the swags across the road and things of that sort. It does look nice. By the time February rolls around, it's dark, it's cold, nobody's going out at night. I'm not sure that 15,000 will get the bang for the buck out of it. Guess I'd rather be spending that 15,000 for the fireworks display that's gonna draw thousands of people downtown, even if it's only for one night, than to have those lights on there. Now, the lights on Main and Broadway and around the parking lots, those are on 2 separate meters where you can meter the lights and you can meter the street lights separately. They're on 2 separate meters in there, and so you can know what those costs are. I don't know about the new lighting systems. Those are on 1 meter or 2 meters. The original ones were all on 2 separate meters at these.
No, at Main and Broadway, at Town Center, not all those trees have outlets at the bottom.
So,
Nor does Michigan, between Oak and Washington.
So
and
you're,
if we only light Main and Broadway and not all the other streets, then we're gonna get the whining from the downtown merchants that, how come it's not in front of my business? So, I think we'd be better off to figure another place to spend $15,000 a year other than lighting, and see if we can get the schools and the churches to sponsor trees downtown and let them put ornaments in the trees that aren't gonna damage them.
so you're more in favor of option 3?
Yeah, I think I'm a 3.
I would, I know I'm gonna break some rings here. I like option 1, I think actually the best. I think that, I think the light does add ambience to our downtown. And I think if we take them down, we're gonna get people complaining, and also, just, I don't know, I think it makes downtown at night a little more comfortable place to be, and that's my thought.
And the money for this is gonna come from the Economic Initiative Fund? Or no?
It's in the general fund.
So all city taxpayers are paying for the lights downtown? That's a lot of money for lights and trees, guys.
You know, I'm just thinking about every single meeting that we had in October or November during years when we weren't going to have lights. And all the people who have come, both the downtown merchants, and I think the community wants us. And that's just based on all the comments that we get. Every time there's a time when we don't have lights. Almost all communities have lights in their downtown at Christmas. I would be very surprised if I drove through a downtown that didn't have lights on at Christmas. And it's dark and people get, seasonal depression, and I think the lights help, and, I love coming down, and I think most people do. I mean, 18,000, we got 25,000 people in town, that's less than $1 a person. I'm willing to spend my buck on having lights downtown. I think it makes a difference. I think it adds to the festivity. One or two, I mean, I don't have a strong point of view on one or two. I sort of agree with the staff's reasons for the recommendation on two, but I can go with either one or two. But I'm not in favor of not having lights. I would be very depressed if we made that decision not to have lights.
But you do have a good point about the community, because when we made the decision in 15, you're right, in 2016, we weren't gonna have any, and you did get a lot of letters, and you got petitions, and you got a lot of input at that time saying, we want lights downtown. So there was a great swell of input at that time. I'm not sure how much of it came from property owners versus residents, but you did hear from a lot of people.
I would be more in favor of doing town center up very elegantly and having the swags across the street and not do all the trees up and down the blocks. They're just a pain in the tuition.
And from what I remember in 2016, it was mostly the business owners, because someone on the commission put something on Facebook and they all came out in droves by kind of prompting them, hey people, there's not gonna be lights downtown. You remember that commissioner that did that on her Facebook? Yeah. Hey people, there's not gonna be downtown lights, and then of course she ran a downtown business, so she kind of brought that swell on. If that was genuine, we won't really know, because it was, what I remember were mostly downtown businesses, but.
There were a
it's-
lot of petitions, I think, were primarily from that. I went and found because I couldn't believe we were discussing this again, so I was trying to figure out, when did we discuss it the last time?
Yeah.
November 2nd, at a special meeting. And we had the special meeting because there was so much outrage over the fact that we weren't gonna have lights, and that if we didn't have that meeting on November 2nd, it was gonna be too late to put them up. So I just think, there isn't any question about it, and so I looked at a lot of that material, and a lot of petitions were from, people downtown, although they were putting the petitions out, and people coming into the stores were signing, saying why they were, that they would like to have the lights.
But that was because we already bought, or they already spent money on big wreaths, and that was the big dilemma at the PSD and the boards up there. Pick the lights or pick the wreaths, and the vote came out to get the wreaths instead of do the lights, and then everybody was mad because they weren't doing both, because they wanted both. They want their pie and to eat it too. And it's really easy for them to say that because it helps their business, but they don't have to pay for it. The taxpayers pay for that. So it's kind of like they had to pick their poison, and when the votes came down and it was saddled with one decision, no, they wanted the other. They wanted both, their pie, and they wanted to eat it too. That's how that went down.
And the other thing that's changed since 2016 too is the building curtains, the light curtains. How many businesses do we have that do that now, Michelle? 10 or?
I think it's 10 buildings, but it's not necessarily 10 businesses.
Okay, so we have 10 buildings now that do the light curtains that we didn't have when we had this discussion in 2016. So I don't know how that may or may not impact it.
We give so much money to downtown all the time, like the general fund is some non-ending source of money. But when we come up with stuff we want for residents or to help certain things, brush pickup or whatever, we kind of find it hard to find those allocations of money. And like, when I look at that, 18,000, that's 2 brush pickups in a year that we, have been fortunate enough, the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe funds it. But this is all the stuff we do for downtown continuously from general fund and not.
But it's for the community too, it's not just for downtown.
I mean, You said 2 brush pickups for 18,000, I don't think that's correct.
Oh, 10 grand.
We're down to about that now for a brush pickup based on the number of people we get.
But the tree damage is real. I mean, tree damage is real by taking it on and off, and the vandalism is real. So, I think an alternative option with less money entailed.
Well, our other commissioners are obviously gonna have to speak on this as well.
Two.
Two. Amy, repeat.
I think that, a lot of cities have gone to just wrapping the trunks instead of going up into the branches. Because of the fact that it does damage branches trying to get them on and off, kids go by swinging them, stuff like that. That's, less costly probably for the most part, because you got, getting the ladders out, getting the people up on there, wrangling them. I can say that, yeah, it seems like a lot of money, but it's not just for the downtown, because the downtown is Mount Pleasant, and it's owned by all of the residents. And a lot of residents come downtown for the Christmas festivities, they come downtown for like the plays.
Santa.
For Santa, and it brings on this ambiance of festivity and Christmassy, and even from, individuals like myself, where I put up a tree the day of Christmas and take it down by 6 o'clock that night, just to appease my children. It's just not, I like walking in the downtown area when the trees are lit up, when there's particularly like the, light curtains. That feels a little tacky to me. But I wouldn't mind just having like the trunks wrapped. We can get those, lights that are encased, the tubes, wrap the trunks. They do it in a lot of cities. They do it in Traverse City, they do it, out in other states. And that might be a more reasonable thing. So I'm not sure which one I would go for.
Well, option one, I think, is you would have year-round lights, and option two, you would have lights for a few months out of the year.
So I don't like year-round lights.
So you're feeling more of an option two.
Yeah.
Takes away the specialty of it.
I'd rather just have it during the holiday season.
So Pete,
Have you ever looked at using colored flood cans?
You think?
Uplighting?
Flood cans, put colored bulbs in each one, you've already got power at the base of those trees.
Yeah, and shining it up.
Shining them up, you could put 2 cans on each one.
And you could do different colors too.
We have, the largest concern there would be theft, quite frankly.
What?
Theft, just walking away with them.
Who's gonna steal them?
College kids, bar night.
Yeah, anybody walking
It's a
by.
trophy.
The same reason why the lights are pulled out of the trees.
Yeah.
There's no actual reason, just vandalism.
Well, I'm saying you can off the box, it's already there, the plug-in box, and you can do it, and then you just put 2 cans, one on each side. Cans are not that expensive, either are flood bulbs.
Or you could do it from above,
Yeah, you could do that also.
from like a roof, fix it, or from the light post. Shining it up.
I just don't know how many trees, on option 2 with 18.6, how many trees are we doing? What is the breakdown per tree?
I'm sure that's the one number I don't have in there.
Lots.
Yeah, I remember when you had the number before, I was.
I did.
Really?
Yeah, I
It
wanna
was
say.
like 300.
I
or
wanna say it was
something.
302. Part of the problem with putting cans underneath, although I like the idea, is we have many trees that don't have electricity underneath the trees. So again, we'd be back to, it's sort of a hodgepodge look, and as long as we know going into that, there are just some areas, such as Michigan Street, or in areas of town center that don't have that power.
But that's gonna be true under option 1 or 2 with
Correct.
also,
Yeah,
right?
so to me, it sounds like we have at least a majority for option two. If Kathy is agreeable to option two, if Tony's agreeable to I would ask my option two friends, would you be willing to extend the time when we take them down from January 15th to a later date?
Yes, just because it's consistent with the curtains though, I guess. So we tell them April 1st, they need to come in, or be turned on.
Originally it was January 15th, and then they left them on and extended it, so that's
Got
why.
ignored, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that we look at the holiday season, November 15th to January 15th or January 30th. Yeah, or February
The
1st.
date doesn't,
That all the lights are off by 1st of February.
we have a hard time telling the private business owner that he can't leave his light curtain up if he wants to pay the bill on it. Then it does look tacky, you get two of them on downtown and nobody else does.
Everybody else was. Maybe that would be enough peer pressure.
So, we're thinking February 1st?
Yep,
Do you agree?
that's
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I'd like staff to, I know it's gonna be a pain forever, but to continue to look for other options, investigate Pete, I'm not gonna be on the commission next year, but investigate Pete's option, investigate Amy's option of just wrapping the trunks with those plastic enclosed ones, and if we can get multiple years out of that, you don't have to get up on ladders, they go up and down quicker, there might be some savings there, to still get some bang for a buck.
There's less damage to the trees.
Yeah.
Do we know how much, I mean, I know they can damage the trees, but have we lost many trees as a result of that?
We haven't lost any trees because what was happening with the trees were growing at a rate where the wires themselves were like embedded into the bark. So we had to go out and loosen them up.
And
then
that's,
in some
and that's
cases
what
they
was
were just.
causing it, right.
But if you're gonna do the other option, where they're not up year round, where the wires aren't up there year round, you're not gonna have that problem.
Correct, but if you're doing the trunk only, you have a chance of saving the lights to use from year to year. If you're
Right.
putting them up in the tree, that's just not.
Right, they
It's
get
not
all
yet.
wind whipped and everything
Yeah.
else, and they're just junk at the end.
Because this has been an endless topic, I do remember a year when we did just do the trucks.
Yes.
And unfortunately, partly just because of the size of our trees or whatever, it looked a little bit like cactuses in downtown.
Yep, people did not like
It's
that.
just
I
not-
heard a lot.
And what I noticed was that there are a lot of places that do the trunks, but most of the places that do the trunks also have some in the branches. At least the ones, like in Royal Oak, for example, where I go on. They do have them around the trunk, but they also have it in the tree. And it just was an odd look. I just remember it was kind of an odd look.
Well, we're never, we're unlikely to have a time that there's a unified look. As we are in rotation to replace our trees,
Right.
we're gonna have some that are full size, some that are medium, and some that are tiny. So that's just something that we're gonna have to accept as part of this then.
The ash trees downtown all died, so you had to replace them. and-
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we suddenly lost. That was part of why it became an issue, because we had a lot of trees on Main Street that were pretty spectacular when the lights were in them, for the first, say, 5 or 6 years that I was on. And then all of a sudden, we didn't have those trees there anymore. That's one of the things that also made it more of an issue.
The bigger the trees get, the more expensive and harder it is to light something up.
I've seen other communities too where they do lights sort of above the buildingscapes, so it kind of like zigzags or goes along the buildings. Yeah, they leave them up, I think, about a year.
I think the swags across the street from Compass Avenue, how many of those do we have left? Any? Three. We have to go.
Just for now, option two.
So it sounds like what we wanna do is keep them up just for the holiday season, put them up, take them down every year. But try to continue to look for other options, so to minimize the damage to the trees and to have it look good.
Right, what, the suggestion that Pete made is, I don't have any problem with that either, in a sense, I mean, I think people love the wreaths, but were a little bit surprised you couldn't see them at night. I think an awful lot of people thought they would somehow be plugged into something. Because that's, is the way it is in a lot of communities where they have the leaves, and then they're lit at night. And because of our poles or whatever, we really didn't have the ability to be able to do that. So if they were lit, you know, it might be a different,
We can only light them on the tall poles, the short poles don't have plugs at the top.
Or you can just basically do a solar too, just like the flagpoles have those little solar, those fixtures are very inexpensive, they're under $25. You could mount a couple of those under there.
What are some of the trees that don't have?
Or some of the light poles that don't have it, that would be an option, and then you could get, say we've lit all the candy cane wreaths downtown, either the plug-in or the solar, and the rest of them are not gonna do anything with them, they're out of harm's way where you can't get at them, that might be an option for future years.
Nancy, are we looking for clarification? Is this something that we're looking to take on for this year or for next year?
How much do you have in this year's budget?
Not enough. That's why I'm just asking the question.
Because this was all focused on next
I
year,
agree.
so
I'm just,
what's your recommendation for this year?
I'll stick with next year. But we wouldn't have time. We'd be rushing it this year. I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page.
So what's got planned for this year to wrap them all? To do the trees in the
We'll just leave the lights that are currently there in the ones this year, and light whichever ones are still working then, Michelle?
Correct.
We budgeted some, a little bit additional to replace some of the strands that were burned out.
Alright, I think we can move on. And we'll talk about parking.
So, you know the situation with parking downtown, we haven't been enforcing the 3 and 10-hour parking since April when the court ruling came out. We gave you the options of free parking versus paid parking. The majority of you said we kind of like the free parking idea is better. We did the survey of downtown businesses and property owners that you asked for, and they too liked the idea of the free parking. But went further to say that, no enforcement instead of using the camera to do enforcement, by quite a large percentage, as you saw from the data we provided you. So based on everything we know about it, based on what we've observed since April, when we quit doing enforcement, what our recommendation would be for you to consider is that we would continue to sell permits for lots 7 and 8, and then we would also turn lot 10 into a permit lot. And that way we could encourage property owners or business owners and their staff to park in those permit lots, because they would, in essence, be guaranteed a parking space in one of those 3 lots, because only people with permits would be able to park there. And we would enforce that like we have been and do it multiple times a day. Then the rest would stay, the other parking lots in the on-street would still stay signed as they are, but it would be more of an honor system, and we would not enforce just like we haven't been enforcing since April. And then for the overnight parking lots, we would still issue the parking permits for our overnight residents and encourage them to park on the odd and even sides like they currently do, so that it helps with snow clearing. But instead of requiring them to do that, we would only make them go to those odd or even nights in nights that we declare a snow emergency. So if we wanted to have the guys come in the middle of the night and clear the lots, and we wanted the cars all out of the way, we could declare a snow emergency, send out the email, social media to let them know that, and that's the only time we would ticket for not being parked in the right spot overnight. We haven't towed in years for those, have we?
Years.
Yeah.
Would the alerts, would those go to like, would you get like a text or something like that?
We could investigate doing that, we'd have to look at methods of how best to get that word out, but many other cities do that, so we could find ways to do that. So that's our suggestion for downtown parking, and wanted to have a chance to discuss that with you before we start, going down the road of what to implement.
you look at the master plan proposal, lot 10 basically is gonna go away. The rest of those new skyscrapers are gonna go and everything else, and
I think that's a few years away.
well,
You won't have to worry about it.
and parking is a bigger pain in the hiney downtown as the Christmas lights. And read the new master plan, there won't be any need for parking downtown. It will be a wonderful bikeable, walkable community all year round, winter, snow, rain, everything. Bottom line is, do what you're proposing.
I like the proposal as well. My only concern, is, like I said, I think the social media outreach, it wouldn't be enough. Like if I had a car downtown and I had a permit, I think, an email or a text, and really preferably a text, and I think that's pretty doable. Just because I'm not gonna be, necessarily on my social media in the nighttime to see, oh, do I have to move my car? But I think making people aware when you get that permit that, hey, we might ask you to move your car if there's a big snow event. Obviously, that education piece is probably really important. The other concern I have is how do we handle people if they abandon their cars in the parking lot? If there's a car that's just.
It gets tagged if they don't respond, or then we file for what they call an abandoned title, and then we have it removed by a tow company, and then they file and take ownership of it. So.
And how do we become aware that there's an abandoned vehicle? Is it just people somebody?
Snowed in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Typically, there's signs that they'll have 15 tickets on the windshield. Snowed in. There's indications.
The reason when we went to the even and odd system downtown and enforced it was we would tow vehicles if they were on the wrong side, and to give people, well, I didn't know, or I couldn't, well, if you're doing it from September when you move into your apartment downtown and you're always even and odd, you'll always be on the right side of the lot. Whereas if it's only at a snow emergency, well, I didn't see my text, I lost my phone, my service was shut off, 10,001 excuses as to why you're not responsible. I'm sorry. We're all live in a real city.
Is lot 10 west of the town center?
Yeah, it's the one right in, yeah.
Is there two different lots there?
The first circle's supposedly lot 3, and the second one's lot 10.
No, they're in lot 10, the part that's closest to Riverview is signed for Riverview residents only. And then the part that's closest to the street, there's 2 rows, that is currently 10-hour parking.
I thought they gave up lot 10.
They gave up the part that's closest to the road, but they kept the 2 rows that are closest to the building.
I think that'd be pretty tough to turn that into designated parking for this.
Why is that?
It's in the center of town for one thing. I don't know how it's gonna work there.
Try it for a year and find out.
My building's next to 8, and we have no problem at all there. There's always on-street parking available on Broadway Street. We double the permits now. Permits are under $75 a piece.
And that lot is oversold by how many, Michelle?
Roughly 12.
And it's never always fun. We have to see our students that buy permits there. Their parents buy permits for the year.
We were trying to identify a lot more on the western side of downtown to help with some of the businesses that are more on the western side, to have them have a guaranteed spot, is why we were trying to find another lot on that side of town.
And the permits are how much?
75.
For all lots?
just for the permitted lots. Right now, lot 7 and lot 8 are the only lots you can buy a permit for.
They were 37.50 before, now they're 75.
I know this year they're 75.
Plus we pay an assessment for on-street parking, which business goes by the school frontage.
Well, we have, my business has its own parking lot, and we bought 3 permits for them, so we can free up space for our clients in our parking spots.
This map says Board of Education.
Yeah.
It's throwing me, it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
and an
yeah.
old map. It's a real map.
So what ones are you planning on doing the permit then, a lot 10?
Our
Lot
suggestion
8?
is lot 7 and 8, which are currently like that, and then adding lot 10.
And then what are you gonna do with lot 12? Are we just gonna keep that solely for parcel B's new tenants?
No, it's a public parking lot for whoever parks there,
Okay, with no permit fee?
not at this point.
Kristen?
I like the recommendation.
Amy?
Yeah, I think that the recommendation is good.
Kathy? Looks like we have at least a majority. We okay to move on? Or are there items the rest of the commission should consider? Okay. Moving on.
So then we move into the fee discussion. And I don't know if you wanna go through those one by one, or if you just wanna talk about ones that you have questions on, because the only new ones that are in the packet that weren't in your proposed operating budget are the 2 that have to do with parking fines, which are the last page. Everything else was, previously in the proposed budget, but we can answer any questions or concerns you have about any of those. How would you like to do it, Mayor?
Let's talk about the new ones first. And then if people have concerns about the other ones, we can tackle those after.
So the 2 parking fine changes are really about changing behavior. It's not about generating revenue, it's not about any of those things, it's really about changing behavior to make the fine high enough that people think about it, and yard parking, and then the handicap space, the only difference there is to not allow a discount if they pay quickly. Again, just to make the fine be a larger fine.
concerns, questions, Kristen?
Sounds good to me.
Amy?
What is yard parking?
Parking.
Not parking in the driveway, not parking on prepared surface. If you park on the lawn and you're washing your car, that's fine, but if you're gonna park there and make what's in the lawn and make it look like you really have them, you can get a ticket.
Kathy, no concerns? Okay.
Does code enforcement actively address yard parking?
Both, code enforcement and police.
And it has to be in a driveway, either paved or gravel.
In a driveway, yep.
Tony?
Correct.
Yeah, the only downside I can see on this is if we're successful, we'll have less revenue coming in because it'll change behavior. But if we change behavior, that's a good thing.
It looks like we're good on parking. Do people have concerns about things that we've already talked about? The cemetery?
I have concern about, well, we only got about 10 minutes left, 7 minutes. I think we should be charging for Christmas tree pickup. We charge for everything else.
That's what's proposed in the Commissioner Bills.
Oh, I I'm sorry, thank you.
We're recommending that in order for us to pick up a Christmas tree, they would have to have 2 refuse tags attached to it for it to be picked up.
My
That would be
question,
$20.
It would be $6.30.
what does it cost to,
Oh, we're not talking large item things, we're talking.
what does it cost to, drop a tree at the roof?
Do you know, Jen?
I know.
Steve? Oh. I thought you were raising your hand. I know if you take a small trailer, which is, I can't remember how many yards, that's $6, I think. And a bag of yard waste is $1, or at least it has been. And I was just wondering, my question to Nancy that I sent her was, are we pricing ourselves, too high with 2-yard tags if I can take it to Murph for half that price? But then again, I don't have to stick it in my trunk and
Right.
take it there.
It's a convenient.
And we don't have to have staff pick it up.
Most of them are grinding up with a wood chipper.
Or they throw them in the river for habitats for the fish.
They're not throwing in the garbage truck and taking to a dump. They grind it.
Yeah, we pick them up and grind it when we pick them up.
Right on this one.
I don't know that we do it on the spot. Do we?
I've seen them before picking up. and
We've done it both ways.
We've done it both ways, yeah.
Right down the street.
It says here, brush is $12 per cubic yard, so it doesn't say anything about
At the Murph.
They say per tree.
I think $6 is pretty reasonable. You know, when I first read it, I thought it was the big item pickup. I was like, that's a lot of money. And then I saw $6. So.
Feeding everybody to death.
You think so?
I think so, absolutely.
I don't agree with that.
Well, you look here since mid-60s, you got a lot of services back then. And you got almost absolutely nothing now.
You can thank the state of Michigan and
Never know, state of Michigan.
reimbursement on that.
I just feel like with the Christmas tree, not everyone would take it. Only people that celebrate Christmas in a Christianity type form have Christmas trees, so that, and then some people don't use Christmas trees, they use fake Christmas trees.
Artificial ones.
So it's kind of, and I would rather, I'm not gonna say, but
And this does follow your fee policy guidelines, that those things that are optional, that not everybody uses, should pay a fee for those, and the taxes are for the general good that most everybody uses, so it follows that kind of philosophy.
And I still have concerns about the $100 cost for people to fill up their tanks and everything. I don't think the rest of the commission's privy to that.
I sent the information out to everybody and then
Okay.
the week email.
Where they only pay $100, they can fill it up, but we've got people that are running businesses like swimming pool fillers, or people that fill swimming pools, people that do, bug spray. They all get to, for a $100 cost, fill up as many times as they want at our water treatment.
I think when we asked staff about that, we were projecting actually quite a bit of profit off that program compared to what if we were, charging a ratepayer. So,
Well, I don't think it was quite a bit of profit.
I mean, yeah, we're not
It
getting
was
rich.
supposedly evened out because of the people that didn't use the however 50 million gallons or whatever it was. And that wasn't the number.
And then the gallons you would have to do to cover it at our rate, and found that most of our users that sign up for that use way less than that, and there are a couple that use more than that, but on average, it more than covers what the ratepayers would have paid.
Well, I still don't feel comfortable with that, just so you know.
So we're good on Christmas trees.
I agree with Pete, I'm not in favor, I'm not gonna argue about it, but I think it's a service we've been providing for a long time, I don't pick up less. The one complaint I hear consistently, as I mentioned before, is how much more difficult it is for people in Mount Pleasant to get rid of things. Because there's a charge for everything, there's lots of things the city doesn't pick up, compared to a lot of other cities. So I think picking up Christmas trees is a service people have become used to, and I would rather leave it free, but I'm not gonna vote against the budget.
And you know, and see how I feel about our regular tags that we increase every single year, that everybody usually has to have, unless they have someplace they can burn outside the city limits. Almost everyone in the city uses bag and tags, yet we are increased for that cost every year, we get an increase. Where, you know, it cuts into someone's budget. There's one thing about, you have to pay for a Christmas tree pickup because you bought a Christmas tree, but everybody gets rid of trash. And that is a cost that is sometimes, you know, a large portion of their budget.
I voted against it last year, if you remember, but.
Yeah, I-
Because of how large the increase was at
Absolutely.
one time, but.
Absolutely, yes.
And the only other thing I would say on the fees, if we're just talking about are there any other fees, I won't be here, so it won't make any difference, but on the peak, you know, the line that, I mean, it's they have to pay for themselves unless it's an issue where the commission feels differently. Recreation is one of the issues where we said we feel differently, and so the line in here that says it's not covering all the costs, that's okay with me. I like my tax dollar going to help and subsidize people. It's a good program. I think the people who most need it are the ones least are the most likely not to go because of the cost, so I have no problem with the fact that some of my tax dollars goes there.
And just to clarify that is not, that one we know is a program that you would like to not be 100% funded. It's just the summer program is even less funded by fees than the after-school program. So we're just looking at the summer program fees to see to be consistent with the after-school. But we have no intent to bring you a recommendation that would cover the full cost of that, because we know that that's not your preference.
I believe the school should be helping us pitch in for peak. I don't think the city taxpayers should have to do that.
Well, right now, luckily, the city taxpayers aren't, because it's funded by fees and contributions from the tribal 2% grant and from contributions from United Way. So far, city taxpayers haven't had to fund that program, but it is dependent on those ongoing grant programs at this point.
The after school and the summer?
Yes, both of them.
It's an hour.
Are any of these that you want brought back at the next meeting for further discussion?
Everybody's okay with increased water fees?
No.
Recycling?
That's never gonna change.
Okay, I guess we're not really hearing complaints, clamoring. I think some of those things are sort of out of our hands, correct? You know, I mean, we need that money to cover our costs.
Right, as I said, I don't know that they're out of your hands, because you certainly have to approve them, but they're based on the cost of providing the services that we have from water and wastewater plants, so, and that's the only revenue source they have is from the fees.
Yeah.
In your budget, it shows the multi-year projection of those, and those costs of running the aging plants continue to be a challenge. So unfortunately, we will see regular requests for water and wastewater.
Go to automation, then we won't have to have staff. Robots, there you go.
Okay, well, I would move that we adjourn at 9:56.
We'll just have Jamie and that's it.